My name is Jimmy, and this is my Savior story. I'm a police officer from North Mississippi. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years. I want to share with you how God has changed my life. And I was saved as a young child, just like many people are. And you go through life, and of course, as you know, when we go through life, everything changes. And I guess my story began in 1994. I was shot in the line of duty, and pretty severe situation where a 14-year-old male shot me while I was on a traffic stop. I went to the emergency room that night and had extensive injuries, which resulted in me having to be brought back to life twice that night. I was in ICU for approximately 7 weeks. It took me a year to get back on my feet to return to work, and that's one thing that I had made up my mind I was going to do, was go back to work and be a police officer. I did not know where the drive came from, but that was the drive I always had. And as a result, I went back to work, and I fought really hard to go to work because of the health problems that I had, and I tried not to let other people see them. And as my health began to get better, I started having psychological problems, which I hid from everyone. And as a result of hiding this pain, I ended up becoming an alcoholic, because the only way I could go to sleep at night was to drink enough to be intoxicated to pass out, because if I did not, I would have nightmares. And it was just hard to go on with life from that point. And approximately in 1998, I had one of my many surgeries. At this point in my life, it's been 17 years since my shooting. I've had 18 surgeries. They come every pretty much 6 to 15 months apart, and I've gotten used to it at this point, but at that time I didn't. I questioned God's reason for leaving me here, and I questioned Him for all the problems that I had, especially when the psychological problems started moving in on me. And as a result of the shooting and the way I handled it, I've lost a family of 14 years. I lost a good wife and son, which my son is always still a part of my life. But I lost something that was very dear to me, and it was actually more important than my life to me at that time. And that's pretty much where I went from there. After I lost my marriage, the doctors forced me to go into retirement. And at that point, I'd lost everything in my life, and I blamed God for it. And I took it upon myself to control things at that point. And as you can imagine, everything went downhill. At one point in my life, I'd gotten so low. The only thing I had was visitation rights with my children on every other weekend. And that's a lot of loneliness, to be by yourself the rest of that time. I'd lost every friend I ever had. The administration in my department had actually turned their back on me because they didn't understand what I was going through, and they were scared of me, and had very good reason to be. And I didn't understand that at that time, but I do now. I'd actually gotten to the point in my life where I was suicidal. My drinking had become very extensive, in excess of a case of beer and a fifth of whiskey a day. And I basically just living that life because I didn't have any other life to live. At one point, one night I pulled into a boat ramp, which was one of my favorite places where I grew up, on a government lake there. And I was very well intoxicated. I had my Glock laying on the seat next to me. I had one in the chamber, and I'd laid the magazine in the glove compartment. And I put the gun under my chin, and then I thought about it. Well, I don't want some innocent person to find me like this and see this through the window, so I laid the gun in my lap, and I reached up and grabbed my visor to pull it down because I didn't want to be able to see through the window, and a picture of my children fell in my lap. And I spent the rest of that night crying in my truck until I sobered up enough that I drove to my parents' house and asked them to help me get help. God showed me that what I had to live for, and at that time, I started my healing process, which was a long road. I got treatment, and I started understanding the mental illnesses that I had, which was post-traumatic stress disorder, and according to my doctors, one of the most severe cases they had ever seen, because I had hid it for so long. And as I got on the road to recovery, I had actually moved from my hometown to have a change of scenery. I thought it would give me a fresh start, and I wanted to do things better. I went on with life. Actually met a wonderful woman that has God in her life, and you could see it in her when I met her. And she never tried to change me, but in fact she did change me. But it wasn't by demand or pressure. It's just because I wanted to be more like her. I eventually moved back to my hometown because of my children, so I could try to keep my family together. And I ran into my old police chief the first week I was in town, and an anger and a filled my body that I did not understand, and to the point where, you know, I was willing to take his life. That's how angry I was at him, because I felt like he abandoned me when I needed him the most. Because when you're in law enforcement, that's the only family you have. When you put on a badge, all the friends you knew as a child and it's through high school, they're no longer your friend. The only friends you have are the brothers and sisters that you work with on a daily basis. And after I saw the police chief, I went home that night, and my wife could tell something was wrong, and I went into with her what was wrong. And you know, she said, "Why don't you just call him?" And I said, "You just don't understand. We don't communicate." She said, "Why don't you just try and call him?" So I picked up the phone and I called him, and he answered the phone, and I said, "Chief," which that's what I've always called him. And he said, "Who is this?" And I told him, and I thought he was going to hang up the phone, because he knew very well how I felt about it. And he asked me what I wanted, and I said, "I really need to talk to you." I said, "You know, a lot of time has passed since the last time I saw you. A lot of things have changed in my life, and there's just some things I need to talk about." And he agreed to meet with me, and the next morning I went and met with him. And being police and being paranoid like we were, and he knew the anger I had, and he knew the way I was the last time he saw me. I got to where he had agreed to meet me. He set up 2 chairs in the center of a room just by themselves, and I sat in one and he sat in the other one facing me. There was nothing else around us in the center of a big open room. And I walked in. He didn't shake my hand. He just asked me to come in. I sat in the chair, and he sat down in front of me, and before I could even say anything, I saw tears come in his eyes, and he said, "I'm sorry." And I did not understand. I didn't know how to feel at that time. And I asked him what he was sorry for, and he said, "Jimmy, you scared me, and I didn't know what to do for you. And the only thing I could do is get away from you. And I had all these other people I had to protect, so I took them away from you too. And I see now that's the worst thing I could have ever done to you." And at that point, I had nothing else to say. I didn't know what I was going to say when I got there, but he said it all for me. And we talked for a long time and kind of caught up with where our lives were at this point. He was actually retired, and I definitely moved on with my life. Had worked with different agencies when I moved away. And we shook hands, and about 2 days later I got a phone call from a gentleman that is very important to me in my life today, and his name's Tim Rutledge. And he had developed a team of peer support, which are all police officers throughout the state of Mississippi at that point, that actually came in for people like me. and he invited me to the next class he had, which just happened to be 2 weeks later. And I hesitantly agreed because I didn't understand. I hadn't been around people that cared about me in a long time, or I didn't let people care about me for a long time. And when I went to the program 2 weeks later, I didn't want to be there. I was full of anger, and it's like everything that ever happened to me was sitting right back on my shoulders, and I did not understand what was going on. So I went. My wife really pushed me to go. She thought it would be a great thing for me to do and help me put things behind me and put them in perspective. As the class went through the first day, part of the class participation was I had to give my testimony of why I was there. I had to tell my story of what happened to me. And as I did, a peace just came over my body. And I looked around the room and actually saw approximately 40 other police officers that were crying with me for a change instead of looking at me. And from that point, my life changed. And the class was 4 days long. Of course, that night, I probably slept more than I'd slept in the last 13 years. And the next morning, I got up from class and I came in, and people kept commenting that I looked like a different person. My whole personality was different. The look on my face, the color of my skin was different. And I had not realized it, but I knew I could actually breathe. And I went through and participated in the class, and I learned every technique that was in there because they didn't know at the time, but they had changed my life forever. And we went through, in the last day of class, I went up to Tim and I shook his hand and I told him, I said, I want to thank you for what you did for me. And he told me, Jimmy, I didn't do anything. That was God. And I said, but you have a wonderful program. And he said, this isn't my program, Jimmy, this is God's work. And from that day forward, I've been doing God's work. And I have let God back into my life, and I actually let him lead my life. And as a result of that, I'm now the North Mississippi director for the LEAPS program. I'm a hostage negotiator, and I'm also a chaplain. And I questioned so many years, God, why did you do this? And if I would have just gotten on my knees and given it to him and just asked him to show me what he had for me, I probably could have missed a lot of suffering. You can always question things that happen in your life. In hindsight, it's always 20/20. He may not have changed it. He may put me through the trials that he did for a reason. But I can guarantee you, he brought me to the place I needed to be to spend the rest of my life.